Let's get right into it. Number 15, Paris Syndrome. Yeah, let's start with this one, Paris Syndrome. This syndrome may manifest itself without you knowing. It's usually an extremely odd temporary mental disorder that causes one to become completely overwhelmed while visiting the city of, yeah, Paris. And I know this does sound like a made-up syndrome, but I promise you this is a real thing. I can't imagine arriving in Paris and then on the spot inheriting this syndrome. It just seems like a syndrome out of a sci-fi flick. And honestly, the syndrome seems most fitting for the state of Florida. Interestingly, this syndrome seems to be the most common among Japanese travelers. Of the approximate 6 million Japanese visitors to Paris each year, 1 to 2 dozen experience the overwhelming anxiety, depersonalization, derealization, persecutory ideas, hallucinations, and acute delusions, often believed to be triggered by language barrier, physical and mental exhaustion, and the reality of Paris as compared to the idealized version. Perhaps you'll think about this the next time you visit Paris. Number 14. Obsessive-compulsive disorder. Now, I don't know if this happens to you, but I often hear people all the time claim they have OCD. It seems as if they're using it to express how clean they like things, but they seem to underestimate how serious the condition really is. A person with real OCD is characterized by immense fear, anxiety, and recurring thoughts of worry. It's only through the repetition of tasks, as mentioned before, the well-known obsession with cleanliness, that sufferers of obsessive-compulsive disorder are able to find relief from such overwhelming feelings. What's worse is those with OCD are often entirely aware that their fears are irrational, though the realization alone brings about a new cycle of anxiety, only furthering their stresses. Number 13. Diogenes Syndrome. Diogenes Syndrome is more commonly referred to as simply hoarding, and is one of the most misunderstood mental disorders that are often ignored by many. This mental illness has gained popularity due to the sheer amount of views it solely brought to the popular television show Hoarders. You've been watching the show for 5 hours. Damn it, Sarah, there are 14 seasons. I am determined. The victims of this disease are often characterized by their overwhelming desire to collect seemingly random items to which an emotional attachment is then formed. In addition to uncontrollable hoarding, those with Diogenes syndrome often exhibit extreme self-neglect, apathy towards themselves or others, and social withdrawal. Number 10. Factitious disorder. Most people often cringe at the first sniffle indicating a potential cold or illness, but not those with factitious disorder. The disease is characterized by an obsession with being sick. In fact, most people with factitious disorder intentionally make themselves ill in order to receive treatment. Sometimes, sufferers will simply pretend to be ill, a ruse which includes elaborate stories, long list of symptoms, and jumping from hospital to hospital. Such an obsession with sickness often stems from past trauma or serious mental illness. It affects less than 0.5% of the general population, and while there's no cure, it is often able to be limited via psychotherapy. Number 11. Dissociative identity disorder. Here's a quick story about this one. I was at work and a friend of mine said her girlfriend had this disorder. She told me that when they had playtime in the bed, another character that wasn't her normal personality would come out sometimes. Dissociative identity disorder, also known as multiple personality disorder, is a terrifying mental illness and often misunderstood. I sure as hell didn't understand it when she told me about it. Generally, less than 0.1% of people who suffer from DID often display different identities, and sometimes even more. My friend told me her girlfriend had up to 50 different ones, some younger, some older. I don't know if she was lying or not, but it sounded legit. The American Psychiatric Association puts it that the victims of dissociative identity disorder suffer from problems with their memory, identity, emotion, perception, behavior, and sense of self. Sufferers routinely cycle through their personalities and can remain as one identity for hours or for years. They can switch identities at any time and without warning. Often, it's nearly impossible to convince someone with DID that they have it. For these reasons, those with dissociative identity disorder are unable to live normal lives and therefore usually live in psychiatric institutions. Number 10. Capgras delusion. This is a debilitating mental disorder in which one believes that the people around them have been replaced by imposters. To date, it remains as one of the most fascinating anxiety disorders. People suffering from this severe mental disorder believe that these imposters are usually thought to be planning to harm the sufferer. In one case, a 74-year-old woman with Capgras delusion began to believe that her husband had been replaced with an identical-looking imposter who was out to hurt her. Capgras delusion is relatively rare and is most often seen after trauma to the brain or in those who have been diagnosed with dementia, schizophrenia, epilepsy, or an anxiety disorder. Number 9. Reduplicative amnesia. Alright, so bro, this one is similar to the last one, but instead of believing that people are duplicates, those with reduplicative amnesia believe that a location has been duplicated. This belief manifests in many ways, but always includes the sufferer being convinced that a location exists in two places at once. The term reduplicative amnesia was first used in 1903 by neurologist Arnold Pick. Today, it's often seen in patients with tumors, dementia, brain injury, or other psychiatric disorders. Number 8. Stendhal syndrome. Often, it's a psychosomatic illness that is, fortunately, seemingly only temporary. The syndrome occurs when the sufferer is exposed to a large amount of art in one place or in other environments characterized by extreme beauty. Those who experience this odd yet scary mental disorders report sudden rapid heartbeat, overwhelming anxiety, confusion, dizziness, and even hallucinations. It was named after the 19th century French author who described in detail his experience after an 1817 trip to Florence. Those who suffer from Stendhal syndrome may not have a history of mental illness or mental disorders. However, it may more commonly present itself in those with anxiety disorders or other mood disorders. Number 7. Alice in Wonderland syndrome. Also known as Todd syndrome, Alice in Wonderland may be pure fantasy, but one of Alice's more bizarre experiences, making it one of the scariest mental disorders. The syndrome usually causes one's surroundings to appear distorted. Just as Alice grows too tall for the house, those suffering from Alice in Wonderland syndrome will hear sounds either quieter or louder than they actually are, see objects larger or smaller than reality, and even lose sense of accurate velocity or textures. Also, I get the reasoning behind the name, but at the same time, I believe distorted perception syndrome would be more fitting for the name, but I guess Alice in the Wonderland syndrome is more creative. Anyways, this terrifying mental disorder, which has been described as an LSD trip without the euphoria, even morphs one's own body image. Number 6. Courtyard delusion. Hearing this might make you believe that the Walking Dead is a real thing. This scary mental disorder causes the sufferer to believe that they are the Walking Dead. Literally, we're talking the belief that they're a ghost and that their body's decaying and that they've lost all blood and internal organs. The feeling of having a rotting body is usually also part of the delusion, and it shouldn't come as a surprise that many sufferers of courtyard delusion experience severe depression or manic depression. In some cases, the delusion causes sufferers to starve themselves to death. This terrifying disorder was first described in 1880 by neurologist Jules Courtard, though fortunately Courtard's delusion has been proven to be rare. The most well-known case of Courtyard delusion actually occurred in Haiti, where a man was absolutely convinced he had died of AIDS and was in hell. Number 5. Alien hand syndrome. Those with this scary mental disorder experience a complete loss of control of a hand or limb. The uncontrollable limb often seems to take on mind and will of its own, and sufferers have reported their alien limb attempting to choke either themselves to death, ripping clothing, or scratching to the point of bleeding. Sometimes their hands would even violate themselves in a non-consensual sexual manner. Alien hand syndrome often appears in patients with Alzheimer's disease, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, as a result of brain surgery during which the brain's two hemispheres have been separated, or mental illnesses. Unfortunately, no cure exists for alien hand syndrome, and those affected by it are often left to keep their hands constantly occupied or use their other hand to control the alien hand. Number 3. Boanthropy. This mental illness is likely one you've never heard of, but yeah, it's real. Those who suffer from the very rare but very scary mental disorder, boanthropy, believe they're cows, often going as far as to behave as such. Recalling a story in the Bible of King Nebuchadnezzar, he is described as being driven from men and did eat grass as oxen. Now, that's exactly how this disease manifests itself in individuals. Those suffering from boanthropy usually do not seem to realize what they're doing when they act like a cow, leading researchers to believe that this old mental disorder is brought on by dreams or even hypnotism. Number 2. Clinical lycanthropy. The only difference between clinical lycanthropy and boanthropy is that individuals with clinical lycanthropy believe that they can turn into a wide array of animals, in this case wolves or werewolves, though occasionally other types of animals are also included. Along with the belief that they can become wolves, people with clinical lycanthropy also begin to act like an animal and are often found living or hiding in forests and other wooded areas.
Bruh.
Clinical lycanthropy is a very rare psychotic disorder, and it's typically brought on by mental health conditions. Experts believe it is a psychotic episode caused by schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or a depressive disorder. Number 1. Apodymnophilia. Known also as body integrity disorder and amputee identity disorder, apodymnophilia is a neurological disorder characterized by the overwhelming desire to amputate or damage healthy parts of the body. Though not much is known about this strangely terrifying mental illness, it's believed to be associated with damage to the right parietal lobe of the brain. Because the vast majority of surgeons will not amputate healthy limbs upon request, some sufferers of apodymnophilia feel forced to amputate on their own, a pretty dangerous scenario. Of those who have had a limb removed by a doctor, most are reportedly happy with their decision even after the fact. As I'm speaking, today, apodymnophilia stands out to be one of the most interesting mental disorders that mental health professionals are clearly still trying to understand and treat. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk, and remember, knowledge is power.
Knowledge.